Okay, boys and girls. For those of you who thought the alternating timers solution on the Lighthouse was stupid, here's something even more insane. Someone challenged me to make the Lighthouse not just blink on and off, but to make the lights rotate around all four sides of the Lighthouse. So turn on one side, then turn on the next side, then turn on the next side, and around all the way around all four sides in a loop continuously so that it would be more like a rotating beacon of a actual lighthouse. Well, to do that, you can't just have two timers going back and forth. You have to have something a little more complex that will remember where the last one was at or execute them in sequence. In this case, I'm using effectively a Rust clock to execute them in sequence. If you haven't made a clock in Rust yet, it's really easy to do. You see this timer here? You just set that to whatever duration you want your clock interval to be. In this case, I've set it to 1 second, so it'd be like a real clock, just ticking up one tick every second. What happens is it powers its own blocker that powers the branch that causes its own toggle, so it's a loop. So every time it turns on, it actually causes itself to reset every time it turns off. And so it'll just tick every second. Boom, 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 boom. So that there's one pulse of power from your branch here going out every second. Now I've got that set up to connect to these four counters. And that's how I'm going to make this work. You can kind of disregard the branches along the bottom. They're just a splitting of a power source. If I was going to do this in the actual lighthouse, each of those branches would probably just be a battery or its own circuit so that I could have a boatload of batteries on each of the four sides. If I used a large battery, I could technically put close to 50 lights on each side of the lighthouse, which would be pretty insane, but also freaking awesome. So you can do whatever you want there. The rest of the circuitry above is the important part. And what's going to happen here is you're going to see all of these counters count up at the same time. As soon as I start the clock mechanism over here, it's going to cause all these counters to tick up. 1, 2, 3. But all four of these counters are going to tick up together. And I have the first one set to 5, a pass-through number of 5, which means when it hits 5 seconds, it's going to start this timer. This timer is also 5 seconds long, so the first light will be on for 5 seconds. And then when this counter hits 10, this 5-second counter will start. When this counter hits 15, this 5-second counter will start, and so forth until you get to the end. And then on the last one, instead of the counter just starting the last 5-second timer, it starts the 5-second timer, but it also triggers this series of branches that are each connected to the clear counter input on each of these counters. So that'll reset all of them back to 0. That's why the first one's set to 5, because they'll all clear. And while the last one's timer is running and it's on for 5 seconds, these will all be counting back up again, and this one will hit 5 and turn back on just as the last one is turning off, and the whole sequence starts over again. So, if you don't believe me, here we go. If it doesn't work, I'll look like an ass. Bam. There you go. You can see they're all counting up. It hits 5, the first light starts. It hits 10, the second light starts, the first light stops. It hits 15, the third light starts, the second light stops. And as soon as it hits 20, the fourth light will come on, the third one will go off. They all reset, and then back to 5. You see the first one starts and the last one turns off again. And that loop just continues indefinitely as long as there is still power. And in fact, counters have this thing where generally, I've seen this bug, but generally they remember their last counting point. So when the lighthouse turns off for the night, and I'll just say it's going to turn off right now. There we go. There. Counter was at 8. So this will still work. It's just going to start up in a different sequence. So the second light's going to hit 10 and turn on, and then the third light's going to hit 15 and turn on, and so on and so forth. So it starts out of sequence, as it were, but that's not really a big deal. So it's still an auto starting system. Um, you can adjust these timers, obviously. If you wanted each side to run for, say, 3 seconds, then you just put 3 seconds, a difference of 3 between each of the counters and set each of the timers to 3 seconds, and it'll rotate through them a little bit faster. I could make it slower by slowing down the clock as well. I could just set each of these to 1, 2, 3, 4, and I could set this timer here to 5 seconds. And then it would just tick, 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 tick all the way down. Once every 5 seconds, it would set off another one. This is visually more appealing because you can see what the counting is doing in real time, in real-ish seconds. So, you know, as always, a couple ways to skin the cat here, but this is probably the easiest and most efficient way I can think of to rotate through a number of power systems at a time. You don't have to use this for a lighthouse, obviously. If you wanted to have other things, if you wanted to have lights rotate around the outside of your base, if you wanted to have doors open in a timed sequence, particularly if you're trying to create a trap base, get creative here, guys. Think of something that when somebody triggers the first door, it starts this timer somewhere that opens the next door in front of them, say 5 seconds later, and then keeps it open for another 10 seconds, and then it triggers the next one for 10 seconds, but closes the others behind them, and they would almost only be able to walk down the hall as you're opening doors for them. So rather than turning on lights, you could open doors. And then they're like, hey, this is fantastic. I'm just going to follow all these doors down this tunnel. And then the one at the end has a boatload of shotgun traps and turrets. And boy, that was a fun adventure, wasn't it? And they wouldn't really have a way back out because if you sequence enough doors in order, they can't really go backwards in order necessarily. But or you could put in a memory cell to make sure once the door closes, it never opens again. And then it just opens in sequence, and they think it's fun, and they get trapped inside. So lots of potential for mischief with a solution like this. But yeah, if you haven't done a Rust clock before, this is a good demonstration of where they're fun to use and very simple to make with just 3 components. So there you go. Have fun. Cause mayhem. And if I get really bored, then maybe I'll actually go do this on a lighthouse. See ya.